I hear you much better.
Great. Okay. It was our Skype line. We apologize. We have a few different lines going on. So, all right, we're going to go ahead and go on in. It's going to be muted for about a minute, and then I'll come in. I'll introduce. Around 30 minutes, we have a break, and then about the last 15 minutes, I'll start letting calls in. So, is everything good then? Are you okay?
If you're talking, I don't hear you.
Oh, can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
No, I hear nothing.
Oh, goodness. Can you hear me? Babe, let's just take the call off. Take the calls off. Can you hear me, Dr. Getson?
What calls?
Nothing.
No, take off Skype.
I got nothing.
Just take Skype off.
I can't take Skype off. That's
Well,
how we can, unless he calls in on Skype. You want to have him call
Sure,
in on the Skype?
sure. Okay, hang on. All right, will you take... I'm echoing really bad.
Well, let me turn that down.
All right.
I don't hear anything.
Can you hear me right now? What's the Skype line, babe?
Nope, it's dead.
Let me know. What else? 623. Please. And will you put up the YouTube thing so I could talk to people and tell them what's going on? I'll get it. I'll get it. Don't worry about it. Just put the Skype thing up, please, though. And get going what we have to call. All right. 910 63 0210. 02. Okay, so what are we going to be able to shut down? Will you put the live streaming up? Everybody's asking, please. Okay. Hi, everyone. We're so sorry. We're having a little bit of technical difficulties. We're going to be on in like 1 minute. I apologize. It's not coming up here, though. It's live stream. It's not saying it. Can you see? I mean, I don't want to hear me. I just... Hi, everyone. Okay, can we... All right, can I have that then? Thank you. So I don't know how we're going to do this. So, do you want to call him? Is that him? I hear something like this. Oh, our live stream's a little bit late, that's why. We're so sorry we're a little late here. Why is this going on? Do you know?
Hello?
Hi, Dr. Getson. Can you hear me clearly now?
Yeah, it's not as good as the last time. But it hung up, but I hear you.
Okay. We're not sure what's going on. This hasn't happened before. I apologize.
Yeah, it must be me. Are you still there?
Can you hear me? No. Hello?
No, now it's all blurred. I don't hear anything at all.
Is that better right now?
That's better.
Okay, cool. All right, we're going to have about a minute that you won't hear anything, and then I'll come on, introduce the show, and then we'll just head right into it, okay?
We got it. Hopefully it'll continue to be good.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay.
And I'm so sorry about this.
Okay. We're going to start streaming.
Welcome to Conspiracies Against Wellness with your host, Janelle Elgaway.
Good evening. Welcome to Conspiracies Against Wellness. I'm your host, Janelle Elgaway. If you have a question for our guest tonight, we'll be taking calls the last 20 minutes of the show, around 8:40 p.m. Eastern Time. The number is 415-915-2291. We are also streaming live through YouTube. If you go to our website, at the top, click on radio and click here. I will be able to read your questions and comments. And now for tonight's show. Ready for this one, Con Nation? It's so important to raise awareness on complex regional pain syndrome, or CRPS, which is why I wanted to have 2 weeks worth of shows on this subject. Tomorrow night, Sherry New will be our guest to talk about the amazing advocacy work she continues to do for the CRPS community and her personal journey having CRPS. Tonight, I am honored to introduce our guest, Dr. Philip Getson. He is a general practitioner based out of New Jersey and one of the world's leading specialists concerning CRPS RSD. Dr. Getson, welcome to Conspiracies Against Wellness. How are you this evening?
I'm wonderful, and thanks for the invitation. I'm delighted to be able to talk to your audience and perhaps educate them a little bit more about this disease.
Absolutely. And I apologize about the little blip up we just had. Can you please tell me a little bit about yourself and what is your background in?
I started out in practice almost 41 years ago in a conventional general practice, and I did what general practitioners did 41 years ago. I did hospital work and nursing home work and office work, and it kind of changed in about the mid-1980s when I had a woman come into my office with a constellation of symptoms, and I had no idea what was wrong with her. Well, I was in general practice at the time, so I did what any good, upstanding general practitioner would do. I sent her to about 17 different specialists for an answer, and at the end of about 6 months, I knew exactly what was not wrong with her, and I still had no idea what was wrong with her. And I was intrigued by the fact that there was this disease that someone had that I couldn't figure out, and all of my colleagues couldn't figure out. We had a whole bunch of different answers, none of which made any sense. So on a Saturday afternoon, I journeyed out to a local medical library. Remember, 1985, there was no internet, and started researching through books and with my roll of dimes for the copy machine. And there I was on a Saturday. At the end of Saturday, I still had no answer, and came back Sunday, and about halfway through the day, I had a reference to, at that time, causalgia, and we'll probably talk a little bit more about that as time goes on tonight. And I thought, well, I got it. And I spent the rest of the day copying articles, and I went home, and I was very, very happy. And on Monday, I called my patient on the phone, and I said, I have some good news and some bad news. And she said, well, what's that? And I said, well, the good news is I know what's wrong with you. She said, what's the bad news? I said, I have no idea what to do with it. So it began for me at that point in time a journey to seek out experts, to get more literature, to get more information. I traveled around the country, went to lectures, ultimately met Dr. Schwartzman, actually, who was in Philadelphia, and 20 minutes from my office, but I met him in Florida. We developed an association that lasted until he retired 3 years ago, and now here it is 30-some years later, and 1,300 patients with complex regional pain syndrome later, and I'm now talking to a group of people tonight about a disease that I spend most of my time researching and treating.
I want to go back a little bit before then. You founded your practice called TDI, or Diagnostic Imaging, or Health Through Awareness. What treatments do you offer there?
Janelle, you sort of faded away on me. I'm sorry. I did hear the question, but you sort of faded into the distance. I started in practice actually with a different practice, and then about 1982 I founded Thermographic Diagnostic Imaging, which was the use of infrared for diagnosis. I found that infrared was really a wonderful way to assist me in diagnosing certain conditions, and mostly thermography is used for breast disease, and certainly we could probably spend an hour at some point talking about early diagnosis of breast disease using infrared. Health Through Awareness came along around 2000, and it was really the brainchild of my wife, Leisha, who is a holistic health practitioner, a graduate of the School for Institute of Integrative Nutrition, and a Reiki master. And so we started to integrate some holistic health care along with thermography and along with the use of diet, nutrition, and Reiki and other energy medicines to educate people and to help people. And what grew out of that was Health Through Awareness, which became a venue for us to do webinars on a monthly basis and to educate people on a wide variety of topics, not just complex regional pain syndrome or thermography, but everything from dentistry to podiatry to smoking cessation and things of that nature.
You had a 10-year court battle. You won when presenting to the Supreme Court. What was this battle about, and why was it so important that you won this?
Back in 1980-something, I guess it was probably 83, we were doing thermography in New Jersey in motor vehicle-related accident cases, and the insurance industry decided that they really didn't feel that it was a valid diagnostic tool, so they decided they weren't going to pay us. And I had a friend who was a lawyer who was willing to take the case pro bono, so we sued Allstate and State Farm and the state of New Jersey. A 7-week trial ensued with witnesses coming in from all over the country, followed by an appeal after we won to the Appellate Division of the State of New Jersey, and ultimately another appeal, and it went to the Supreme Court of the State of New Jersey. The interesting anecdote about that is that I got to the Supreme Court of the State of New Jersey, and there I was in a today's man suit with my lawyer. Allstate brought lawyers in from their national headquarters. State Farm brought lawyers in from their national headquarters. They were all dressed out in their, $5,000 suits and their $5,000 briefcases. And if you've never been in front of the Supreme Court of a state, and this is not the federal Supreme Court of the state, it's a very impressive thing. And the 5 Supremes walked in, and the Allstate lawyer stood up, and he buttoned his jacket, and he flashed his sleeves, and he cleared his throat, and he never got a word in because the head justice looked at him and pointed to me, and he said, "He wins, you lose, pay the man." And that was the whole thing. So we spent 10 years in the court system, and ultimately we won as to whether or not thermography was a valid diagnostic test, specifically for complex regional pain syndrome, that of course then was called reflex sympathetic dystrophy.
Mm-hmm. So how do you currently refer to CRPS RSD?
Unfortunately, and this will probably upset the RSD Association, but I still call it reflex sympathetic dystrophy, even though I understand that there is a differentiation between type 1 and type 2. But I learned it as reflex sympathetic dystrophy, and if I catch myself, I call it complex regional pain syndrome, and they're not interchangeable, but I still call it RSD most of the time.
Well, our guest last week, Barbie Engel, calls it RSD as well. Why has the name changed so many times over the years?
Well, it's an interesting question. Most people don't know. I'm going to throw some names at you: causalgia, Sudex atrophy, post-traumatic pain syndrome, post-traumatic arthrosis, reflex dystrophy, reflex sympathetic dystrophy, reflex neurovascular dystrophy, oligodystrophy. I mean, all of these names have been applied to this disease in the last 200 years. And I think what happened was around 2000, a group of doctors got together in Budapest, Hungary, after the International Association for the Study of Pain renamed it complex regional pain syndrome, because there were those who thought it wasn't reflexive, it wasn't necessarily sympathetic, and it wasn't a dystrophy, and they were confusing people. So everybody got together and changed the name to complex regional pain syndrome, and then subdivided it into the 3 types that exist, which at this point are, most people know of type 1 and type 2. There's actually a type 3, which most people don't talk about, because it really doesn't exist very much. But there are three types. Type 1 is the old reflex sympathetic dystrophy without a identifiable nerve injury, and type 2 is the old causalgia with a nerve injury. There's a third type called CRPS NOS, or not otherwise specified, where it's kind of a fringe condition. Well, it partially meets the criteria, and it looks like this disease, but we're not really sure that it's type 1 or type 2. But to be honest with you, in 1,300 people, I've never seen that classification.
I never even heard of the third type. It's new to me. Is CRPS RSD an autoimmune disease? Last week, our guest Barbie Engel said that it's not considered a disease, and if it's not, why?
I think it's an autoimmune condition. I think there's very little doubt. I think it's much more complex than looking at it as a simple autoimmune condition, but I think it is predominantly an autoimmune disease that has other component parts to it that we're still investigating it. But if somebody said to me yes or no, and you can't have maybe, then I think it's an autoimmune disease.
What would the significance be if CRPS was upgraded to an autoimmune disease, or as compared to if it wasn't?
I think the government would probably give us more money for research. It's classified as a rare disease, a rare condition by the federal government right now, and so there's some money allotted. I think the biggest problem is that nobody seems to know where to put it. I mean, is this a neurologic condition? Does it fall into the category of a pain condition? I mean, really, what is it? Because it's so many things, which I think the word complex is probably right, but I think it's a disease and a condition, a disease, but I certainly think it's a disease. And when you look at the disease, the ICD-9, the ICD-10 books, which is the International Classification of Disease, 10th edition, it's in there as a disease. Mm-hmm. So I think that if those people classify it as disease, then I think you have to call it a disease.
Right. Well, if I was a betting woman, I'm sure they'll change it a few more times just to confuse us all. So CRPS has been around since the Civil War era. Why are so many doctors still unaware of this? Or they'll say they understand what it is, but then they really don't seem to know what it is.
There's probably any number of reasons. The first is that I don't think that there's enough publicity. It's not taught in schools. There's no course on CRPS unless someone like myself gives a lecture, which is one lecture to a medical school class. It's at best a footnote in neurology or pain management or wherever it has to be. And it is still a rare condition, and I mean, you can't classify it like, heart disease or diabetes or hypertension. And estimates are so varied as to how many cases there are that I think people look at it and say, well, it's not really a disease. There are some people who think this is a psychiatric condition, mm-hmm. and while there is certainly a psychological component to chronic pain, it's certainly not a psychiatric condition. So I think until it gets out there, and one of the big questions has always been, well, why don't more people know about it? And I think the answer to that again is publicity. If you're old enough and you remember when we used to have Labor Day telethons, Jerry Lewis made muscular dystrophy a household word. Michael J. Fox got Parkinson's disease, and you talk about Michael J. Fox and you talk about Parkinson's disease. The late Christopher Reeve was a big advocate for traumatic brain injuries. Who advocates complex regional pain syndrome? I mean, nobody advocates it. There's no telethons. There's no societies where a big name person comes out and says, I have this disease, send money so we can do research. And until we get that person, I don't think we're going to get the notoriety that's going to allow more and more people to understand that it exists and it's out there and it needs to be diagnosed and treated early.
So you just named that a person, it would be great if they could come out and talk about this. Is there anything else that needs to happen in order for doctors to know what CRPS or the world, so we can get better treatments, medication, and it can become an everyday household name like MS, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's?
Well, I think the problem is partially that you have these talk shows, and for example, you have the doctors, you have Dr. Oz, and when there is a show about CRPS, it's 10 minutes, it's 15 minutes, and somebody goes on who maybe has the disease, and it's rarely a doctor talking about disease, and it's just kind of, well, here's what it is, and let me spend the next 5 minutes explaining. Well, I can't explain CRPS in an hour. So and I understand the disease, how can somebody in 5 minutes even begin to understand what it is? There's a whole bunch of websites, there's a whole bunch of blogs, but I think we need to get onto a television show, or we need to get that person to bring it to the forefront and say, yeah, this is out there. There are people who say there's 500,000 cases. I have estimates that go as high as 10 million, and here's where I'm probably going to upset a whole bunch of people. If you include fibromyalgia, which I personally believe is a subsect of CRPS, I really believe that fibromyalgia is a subdivision of CRPS. Well, if you include fibro in this thing, then there's 50 million people in this country alone with this disease. Well, if there's 50 million people, even if there's 10 million people, we really ought to know more about it than making it a footnote in medical school classes.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have CRPS and I also have fibro, and most people that I speak with, they usually have both of those too, so I agree with you on that. How do you currently treat your patients with CRPS?
I guess the best answer to that question depends on how long the individual has had the disorder and how long and what treatments they've had. You know, in my position, I rarely see somebody 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks into the disease. The RSD Association of America suggests that there are 4.3 doctors get visited before somebody makes a diagnosis, and that isn't even talking about treatment. So by the time I get them, I've got 12 inches worth of medical records, and they've had a litany of treatments, whether they're the right treatments or the wrong treatments. And so you have to kind of make a decision based upon what has and has not happened. But on the rare case that I see somebody who has new disease, days, weeks, months, I always start with mobilization. I always tell people to keep moving, just move. Keep the limb, it almost always starts in a limb, keep the limb moving. Make sure that you don't wind up with a frozen shoulder or a knee that doesn't bend. So mobilization is always first. Physical therapy in the hands of an expert physical therapist, and that's really important. When I send a patient for physical therapy, if it's in my geographical area, I have 1 or 2 people that I work closely with. But if I see somebody from out of the area, the first thing I do is walk in and I say, walk into the physical therapist and say, how many CRPS patients do you see a week? And if they say, well, I see 3 or 4 a year, then you go find another physical therapist. Mm-hmm. Because quite honestly, that's not going to cut it. They're going to have you doing things that are counterproductive and, in fact, harmful in a lot of cases. So I work with the physical therapist, and I do it this way. I ask the physical therapist to do an evaluation and call me. And I start my conversations always the same way. I am not now, have never been, and will never be a physical therapist. But I want to know what you're going to do so I can tell you what not to do. I'm not going to tell you what to do because you're the expert. But let's talk about what not to do in this individual. Because there's always something you can do. There's always some form of exercise that you can do. Even if it's sitting down, there's always things that can be done. So mobilization, physical therapy, those are 1 and 2. Number 3, believe it or not, in my world, is diet and nutrition, because what you eat is so important. There's an old saying that we used to talk about, you are what you eat, and it is so true. This is an inflammatory disease, and people with this disease are just, on fire. There's somebody came in one day with a T-shirt say, you want to know what RSD feels like? Pour a can of gasoline over you and light a match. It's an inflammatory disease. Well, if you're eating inflammatory foods, then it's only going to make the disease worse. And the number 1 inflammatory food is gluten. So I talk to people about being gluten-free. I take nightshades away, eggplants and potatoes, which just make people worse. I try and get them to go dairy-free, gluten-free, and sugar-free if they can. Now, that's asking a lot. And people look at me and go, you're asking me to give up everything I like? And I said, I'm asking you to give up the pain. So you have to decide. But these are things that work. Make dietary adjustments. Eat healthy. Eat regular, which is why I mentioned earlier that we talk about nutrition in the practice. And I think it's so very important. You've got to eat right. The next thing is the mindset. When somebody comes into my office and says, my RSD is acting up, I tell them it's not yours. Okay? It's not your RSD. Give it to somebody you hate. It is a disease, a disorder, a condition. My pain is worse. Okay, I understand that. But never my RSD. Don't own it, because the message you're sending out to the universe is that you own this disease, and you don't want to own this disease. You want to kick it. You want to cure it. You want to put it into remission, whatever. Mindset is important. You need to buy into the concept that if you work hard and I'm working hard with you, you're going to get better to some degree. So mindset is important. And then all the other things that are conventionally noted, sympathetic blocks, infusions, injections, spinal cord stimulators, which I know we're going to talk about in a little bit, ketamine, which of course deserves an hour of its own. All of these things are adjunctive treatments. But the 4 things that I'm talking about, mobilization and physical therapy and diet and lifestyle adjustments and mindset, go for everybody. It doesn't matter whether you've had 1 day of treatment or 20 years worth of treatment. You need to do all of those things, because those are the things that are going to make you better while we're doing all these other things to improve the symptoms.
Absolutely. And actually, you're speaking my language right now, because that's exactly what I did about 1.5 years ago. I've been dealing with diseases and chronic illness for 23 years now, but I got CRPS in 2009, but wasn't diagnosed till 2015. And when I found out, I kind of just jumped into all the research, and I decided, okay, what do I have at my hands that I can control? And those things that I could control was diet, exercise, and my mentality. So exactly what you just said.
I'm losing you again.
Oh, can you hear me now? I'm so sorry about that. Is that better?
Janelle, I can't hear you at all right now.
Oh, man. Dr. Getson, could you hear us? We're so sorry about this. Are you there? Are you there? Hello, hello.
Somewhere along the line,
Can you
I
hear me?
lost you. I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry. I don't know what's going on. We could hear you, and I apologize, everybody that's listening. I apologize, Dr. Getson. Can you hear me at all? I just shouldn't speak. Well, I was just trying to tell Dr. Getson of what I've been doing, and once he comes back on, we'll keep going with it. But I did what he was just talking about. I did the diet. I did... Can you hear me, sir?
I don't have any sound.
Oh, babe, that's bad. I apologize, everyone. So I'm going to just talk a little bit until we can somehow get him to patch through. We were having problems with the same exact thing earlier before you all came on, which is why we didn't get on until 8:05 p.m. Now I can't hear myself. And I don't think it's on our side, but I'm not sure. I apologize, everyone. So Dr. Getson was talking about diet, exercise, and mentality, and that's exactly what I've done. I have degenerative disc disease, Raynaud's disease.
Kind of at a loss here without any sound coming back from you.
I apologize, audience. Give us 1 second here. We'll call you back. All right, go ahead. Okay, so we're going to call him back, but while we're doing that, I'll just talk quickly about what I'm doing. And I really apologize about this. We're not really sure what's going on because, whoa, really bad. Hey, so sorry. This has never happened like this bad yet, so I'm not really sure what's going on. Until he gets back on. Honey, it's still really bad. Can you please turn it down? Okay, he'll be coming here. It's really bad.
Thank you for calling Call-In Studios host and call screener line.
Alrighty. Hello? Dr. Getson? Is he in yet? Oh, okay. So I'm going to just kind of talk, I guess, until we get him back in. So diet, exercise, and mentality. Diet. I have went to a antioxidant, anti-inflammatory diet. And then, can you kind of change my volume a little bit? And then by doing that, I cut out red meats. I cut out dairy, wheat, carbs. That's better. Thank you. And that's what I did. And then,
Hello?
Hi, Dr. Getson. Could you hear me?
There we go. We got you back.
Yay. Okay. I apologize, everyone. There's a little bit of echo. Okay, so we're going to just kind of go into the next thing. I apologize. Last week I started taking ketones, and a lot of people are asking me to ask you this.
You're fading out on me again, I'm sorry to say.
Okay. Can you hear me?
There you go. Much better.
All right. So last week I started taking ketones. My fiance and best friend started taking them as well. And my best friend has PTSD. My fiance.
No, I don't hear anything at all.
Oh, goodness. Can you hear me now?
Okay, got you back.
All right. So ketones. Is that something that people should stay away from with autoimmune diseases? Did you hear me? Dr. Getson? This is not
Nope,
good.
I have nothing again.
Honey, what are we going to do here? Can you hear me? Dr. Getson? We can hear you. I don't know why you can't hear us. This is really bad. I'm wondering if we should shut it down and do it tomorrow. Brian?
It's up to you.
Alrighty. I am so sorry, audience, but I don't
Hello?
think... Hi, can you hear us? I think we should go back tomorrow. I'm not really sure what's going on. And I know it's coming through all funny right now because we had to put our levels up so high. So Dr. Getson can hear me because it's going bad. So we're going to get off here, but we'll come back tomorrow at 8 with Dr. Getson. And I apologize for this. We'll see you tomorrow.